Today's vodcast is something different. Thank you all for attending. We decided to do a live vodcast today. We haven't done that before, but we are very fortunate to have our vodcast master, Bill Peschel, as our, he's really our interviewer. He does such a great job. And it really is, he has made it a true conversation with the authors that we have participating. It's really, what he does is just really great. We are so fortunate to have Bill do this for us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our master interviewer, Bill Peschel.
Yay! Yes, that's right. We're gonna put in the audience applauding here as well. Thank you, and welcome to Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents A Conversation with Tom Mead. Tom is a British writer with a fondness for locked room mysteries and magic. He has combined both of them into the character of Joseph Spector, who in the 1930s is a retired music hall magician who assists the police, particularly Inspector Flint, in solving bizarre crimes. And he has two books, Death and the Conjuror, which I have read, and The Murder Wheel, which is the second book, which I am halfway through, and I'm going to read the rest of it tonight because I just didn't get done in time, and I really want to find out how it happened. So, Tom, thank you very much for showing up today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Bill. It's lovely to talk to you.
Yes, I raced through Death and the Conjurer fairly quickly, which is kind of unusual for me. I'm at an age where it takes a lot longer to get to go through a mystery. It's dialogue heavy. There's enough descriptions to set the scene. And with historicals, it's kind of a temptation for authors to show off their knowledge, all that in-depth research. And there is some of it in here, particularly about magic, but not quite as much. It's not as thin as, say, James Patterson, but it's not as thick as Carr, for example. And what I do particularly like is how streamlined your story is. And it kind of reminds me of Agatha Christie. Was this kind of an intention on your part? Did you have an idea about how you were going to write these books?
Yes, it started off as a very conscious pastiche of the classic Golden Age mysteries. So I grew up reading Agatha Christie. And her work was very much the kind of springboard that set me off into the world of Golden Age detective fiction. My personal favorite these days is John Dixon Carr, who was the so-called master of the locked room mystery. But it's interesting that you talk about reading Death and the Conjurer quickly. I think that's a good thing. A lot of people have told me that, and I think this kind of mystery benefits from being read quickly. I think that's true of a lot of books from the 30s and 40s that are in the kind of puzzle mystery vein. I think the momentum is key with that kind of book, and also with the sort of game element, which is what I enjoy. The idea of it being a kind of a puzzle and a challenge for the reader. So this idea of it being a kind of a performance for the reader, and the reader having to kind of play along, rather like a magic show. That's what appeals to me, and so it's quite gratifying. People are sort of racing through it to the end, because to me, that's the mark of a good mystery. That's what when I've raced through a mystery, I know that it's because I've enjoyed it and I've needed to know what was coming next. But in terms of the research and the period detail and things, I read mainly Golden Age mysteries, particularly when I'm working on something that is in that vein. So I think in just kind of immersing myself in the era and in the style, the language, and of course books in general were shorter in those days as well. So there was this idea of perhaps a more sparse prose style, but at the same time a very densely plotted piece of work. So for instance, Christie's a good example. She's somebody who could give you she could sort of evoke a character in just a few simple words, and you could visualize that character. She had a real gift for that, quite she made it look very easy, I suppose. And it's easy to take for granted how gifted she was as a prose stylist, you know, and how she could evoke a setting or conjure a character in just a few words. So that's the kind of thing that I was trying to do with Death and the Conjurer. And also with the murder wheel. You'll notice it more with the murder wheel, I think, because unlike Conjurer, the murder wheel is set over the course of a single night. So consciously an attempt to keep that pace and that momentum going.
Okay, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I wanted to talk about Joseph Spector, who is your amateur detective here. And I'll only quote from the back cover as far as a description that he is a retired music hall magician. He dresses in the faded glamour of the prosperous 1890s, and his face was creased like balled up newspaper. And all I could think of is Ian McKellen would be
yes.
play that
one
role.
of those old. I often picture one of those sort of great British stage actors, you know, slightly larger than life character, very someone who's a presence in a room, you know.
Yes. Was he based on any magician in particular? Any particular characters?
What there are various real life influences on the character. In terms of the characterization, an obvious one is Harry Houdini, because he was famed as a debunker of fraudulent psychic mediums. So he had a knack for kind of unraveling real life applications of magic theory. So, you know, using magic and stage gimmicks to create the illusion of the supernatural. So that's I think there's a definite analogy there. But in terms of the actual development of the character and the way that he sort of carries himself, there was a wonderful illusionist called James Randi in the latter half of the 20th century, who had a very kind of flamboyant stage persona, but at the same time he had that wonderful logic and that kind of earthbound reasoning, and he was great at like Houdini, he was great at exposing the frauds and the scammers. But in terms of the actual visuals of the character, how I picture him, it's very much a Hammer horror type of character. It's a sort of combination of a Peter Cushing and a Christopher Lee, somebody who's quite statuesque like Christopher Lee, very tall, but with that kind of hollow-cheeked and soft-spokenness and those pale blue eyes of a Peter Cushing. So obviously in the slightly overdone Victorian dress as well. So that it's a kind of cocktail of those influences, really.
Well, I find Spector is a very appropriate name, and you have kind of a genius for that as well, because Flint is wonderful for a detective, and his partner Hook as a police sergeant. Is that a conscious decision when did you had to work to find names like that? Oh, and Edmund Ibbs, who is a solicitor,
yeah,
features in the murder. Wonderful, appropriate names. Was that easy is that work to come up with names like that to apply to them?
Yes, I do put a lot of thought into the names of characters. I think it's something that is important. Going back to Agatha Christie and her sort of knack for shorthand for evoking characters in just a handful of words, I think the name is also a key contributor to that. I think it's something that goes back to Dickens as well. Obviously, Charles Dickens was a master at painting a character in very broad strokes, and often the name would be something that was memorable, that had a curious combination of syllables that really just stuck in the mind. And I think that's something that I've always loved about Charles Dickens, and it's an approach that I try to emulate where I can, as in I will give a character's name a certain amount of weight, and I'll try to come up with a sound that, to me at least, characterizes the person.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's move into Death and the Conjuror, which is the first book in the series, which actually features 3 impossible crimes. A man found with his throat cut inside a locked room. There was a body found in an elevator, and the impossible theft of a painting. And again, I wanted to point out what I thought was fascinating about how you introduced the idea of impossible crimes, because you have Flint talking about his attitude towards crime as being philosophical. Most murders are sordid backstreet affairs with no mystery or magic to them. Usually the culprit is whoever was closest to the victim. I hope you don't mind me reciting your prose in front of you.
No, not at all. No.
But increasingly over the last few years, he had been conscious of a burgeoning subgenre of crime which had rolled over the city like fog. Those were the impossible crimes, typically high society affairs, when men in locked rooms were killed under impractical circumstances. Or where, for example, a body was found strangled in a snowy field with only a single set of footprints trailing backwards from the corpse. Murder as a puzzle. I just love the fact it's like you created this world in which crime was normal, and then all of a sudden it wasn't.
So that I'm glad you read that passage, because that very much captures what I was going for, the idea of the pastiche of the classic golden age, in that I'm trying to write something that is set within the world of Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Ellery Queen, John Dixon Carr, of these characters and these situations coexisting. So that was originally what I had in mind, and there are copious references in the book to the writers as writers, but at the same time I wanted to try and capture their sort of sanguine approach to bizarre murders which you get in golden age whodunits.
That was always kind of a problem with amateur detectives of the time, is how do you get them into the case? Of course, with Scotland Yard already there investigating, you could have Lord Peter Wimsey saying, "Oh, well, his brother's been arrested for murder, and naturally he's going to be involved, and he has a friend in Chief Inspector Parker." But here you introduce the impossible crime suddenly occurring, and of course, Inspector Flint needs to find help. So who does he go to?
Yes.
But a magician.
A magician, yes. And I think a great thing about the golden age generally is that it doesn't strive for naturalism. It's not intended to be a realistic portrayal of police work. It's very much an entertainment. It's a game that that kind of leans into a sense of surrealism. You know that nothing like this would ever happen in the real world, but as long as you, as the writer, are playing fair with the reader, you are playing by your own rules, then I think excess of a mystery isn't how believable it is, it's how it succeeds as a mystery. That's always been my approach. And so I think I try to play up the kind of theatrical elements of it. Obviously, having a magician who's an old vaudevillian, it lends itself to that sort of approach. And as a reader, I always admire an audacious plotter, somebody who will go that extra mile and just really kind of you a premise and then kind of stretch it to breaking point. And John Dixon Carr was superb at that. Ellery Queen, the pen name of Frederick Dannay and Manfred Lee, those books are fantastic. Agatha Christie, she did it with a particular panache. You know, she was an ingenious plotter, but at the same time, she could kind of carry it off in such a convincing way that you were just swept along with it. I'm thinking of books like, The Murder on the Orient Express, which, like Death and the Conjuror, it's very dialogue heavy. There's a lot of interactions between the characters, a lot of interviews and things like that to kind of piece together what happened. But the actual premise, which I won't spoil, of course, but the actual premise behind it is incredibly daring and audacious piece of plotting.
Oh, yeah. And she's done that several times. Endless Night, in particular, was just astonishing. And Curtain, of course, her last Poirot book.
Yes.
It really drives home the message that anybody could be the murderer, anybody could be the victim, which is why you can't go into one of her books and say, oh, it's obviously going to be the husband, because sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
Yeah.
And I also found your book was definitely a homage, certainly to Ellery Queen, because at one point near the end, you actually stop and tell the reader yourself, okay, you've got all the facts, it's up to you. But there was also something else you did too, in that in the explanations, you also include a page number back to the beginning. Was that designed from the beginning, or is that it was an amazing idea there, I thought.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say. Yes, I always wanted to do that. I always wanted to have the challenge to the reader, which, as you say, comes from Ellery Queen. Ellery Queen is not the only author to do that. There are less celebrated authors from the time, people like Hugh Austen is another author who wrote some very bizarre mysteries, which I admire. The plots were great; they were very out there and very crazy. But his prose style was not. It was quite clunky and hard to read, which I think is probably why his books are not as remembered as they should be, really, because he did have a lot to offer. But he also used the challenge to the reader, and it just, to me, it kind of encapsulates that fun sense of self-awareness that these mysteries from that era have. So I wanted to try and capture that idea of, I, the mystery writer, am deliberately trying to trick you, the reader, but, see if you can outsmart me, sort of thing. And with regard to the clue finder, the page references, that is something that I have come across in Golden Age mysteries. They don't all do it. There are a couple of Ellery Queens when it's a particularly well concealed clue, and it needs you to kind of flip back through the book to spot it. John Dixon Carr does it a couple of times. He was somebody who was very playful with the form of the mystery novel. His book, The Hollow Man, which was also published as The Three Coffins, that is a book which really dazzled me when I first read it. It's a fantastic impossible crime scenario, and the idea of the mysterious, seemingly phantom stranger arriving at the house is a scenario that appears in Death and the Conjuror as well, although it's different in every other respect. But I think loose premise of The Hollow Man was incredibly influential. In that book, you have a moment where Gideon Fell, the detective, effectively steps out of the plot and addresses another character. There's a brilliant little moment where he says, of course, we're all aware that we're characters in a murder mystery. We can't pretend that we're not. And to me, that was a very bold thing for Carr to do, because it's reinforcing the kind of staginess, the false nature of the premise. But at the same time, it makes the puzzle all the more effective, because you feel that Carr he's treating the reader almost like a confidant and sort of saying, well, it's a puzzle. It's just a puzzle. It's nothing more than that, but it is a very difficult, clever puzzle. And to me, that kind of sort of formal experimentation and playfulness felt very ahead of its time for 1935. It felt very postmodern before postmodernism. In one of Carr's other books, The 9 Wrong Answers, he uses the little footnotes, but he uses them throughout the novel rather than in the solution. And he will plant clues, and he will ingeniously double bluff the reader. And there will be points where you'll be reading something and you'll think, I see where this is going. And then you'll get a little footnote, and at the bottom, Carr, as himself, will address the reader and say, now you might think that this is a clue, but this is one of the 9 wrong answers. So it's that sort of ingenious playfulness and fun, and at the same time that really brilliant, complex layering of clues and red herrings that I wanted to try and capture that and bring an element of that into the Spector novels. But I should say that Martin Edwards is another author who uses a clue finder in his Rachel Savanagh books, which he's still writing. It's an ongoing series. but he does it slightly differently. He doesn't use the footnotes. He will sort of have the clues in a kind of an appendix at the end, which is something that I've seen elsewhere in mystery novels. People like C. Daly King and comparatively obscure writers from that era. So Martin as well is someone who's adopted that kind of formal playfulness.
Right. In your book, in Death and the Conjuror, you also have, as far as the main characters go, you have a psychologist and his adult daughter who is also following him in the profession. Ansel Reese, again, wonderful names, and Lydia, Lidia, which is a very visual clue as well of how odd she kind of is. She's very much her father's daughter and a psychologist in her own right. Is that influenced a little by Freud and his daughter?
Yes, definitely. That was the again, in the early stages of the plotting, that was when I was kind of loosely putting together the premise, I was very much thinking of Freud, who did come to live in London to escape the Nazis at the end of the 1930s. He died in London in 1939, and obviously his adult daughter Anna, they had a famously complex relationship, which it kind of unfolds through their various writings and researches. And so it struck me as an interesting premise to have that elderly psychiatrist, his adult daughter, and then a roster of 3 mysterious patients. I thought that is an ideal premise, So I had my cast of characters before I had anything else, really. I had that premise of that psychiatrist who himself, he has his own set of secrets and a darkness in his past, which is waiting to kind of seep back into the present. But then his cherry-picked 3 patients from kind of interesting high society backgrounds, and they've all got their own bizarre case histories. And when I was first putting together the plot, I knew I wanted it to have Spector, who I'd already written a number of short stories about. But apart from Spector, that was my basic outline, that the very heavily fictionalized idea of Freud and his daughter Anna coming to London and getting embroiled in a mystery.
Yes, and of course they're embroiled in mystery and murder as well, and them and the patients become the focal point of the mystery, although there are branches as well, since you have 2 other impossible crimes to solve too. So it becomes, it's a quite elegant solution, I thought, to the, I can't say too much, but I was very impressed with some of the substitutions that were involved in solving the case. Is that something when you're writing one of these, are you working from a solution and working backwards, or are you trying to find some area in which something happens and you just try to complexify it?
That is a very good question, because honestly, it tends to be a combination of the 2, depending on obviously the individual strand of the plot, So sometimes I will start with a trick, so I'll have a gimmick or a little like you say, a little substitution or a little identity trick or something like that I will be that I will come up with and that I'll want to use in something, and it'll be a case of working backwards from that. Or at the other end of the scale, the stolen painting in Death and the Conjuror, it'll be coming up with the impossible scenario first and having to devise a solution for it. So it's more or less 50-50. You'll see I don't know how far into the murder wheel you are, but you'll see again that there's there are various impossibilities, and again the approach was kind of 50-50. So it's there's no exact science to it from my perspective, but it usually tends to work out the same regardless of my starting point. It's just piecing it together, but whether I'm starting from the beginning or the end.
And I guess also you can look at your manuscript and you can tell all the pieces that you put together. But of course, to the reader, it's all going to be seamless. Having tried to put together books myself, I've come to recognize that they don't know how hard it was to do that little section in the middle there. Make sure the two.
That's it. That's it. That's the idea. Yes. I do think about it in terms of stage magic as well. So I look at the impossible crimes, the locked room mysteries, the elements where there's something seemingly supernatural afoot, and I do try and approach it the way that a performer would. I recently did a talk for the Mysterious Bookshop book club about Haight Talbot, who wrote a book. He wrote two brilliant impossible crime novels, The Hangman's Handyman and Rim of the Pit, which is his masterpiece. It's an amazing book. And he was a magician, and he wrote a book under his real name, which was Henning Nelms. He wrote a book which it's called Magic and Showmanship. And it's a fascinating work because it, as well as looking at how certain tricks are done, so with diagrams and what have you, examining how certain stage gimmicks work, it also looks at magic from a theoretical point of view. So it teaches you approaches to devising your own magic and constructing your own narrative as a magician. And to me, that is also effectively a guidebook on how to write a murder mystery. And many of his principles are ones that I've tried to adopt when I'm writing. And so to me, the mystery novel is really an extension of the stage illusion, the performance of a stage illusion. So I think about it often in very visual terms, obviously, because many of the tricks and the puzzle elements require certain physical criteria for them to work, so I have to think about it visually, but I also try and think about it from a theoretical perspective. I'm trying to have each of the illusions kind of feed into the next one, and to create a kind of a chain of impossibilities, which is something that I notice in Carr, for instance, in The Hollow Man. He does that really brilliantly, so that each impossible circumstance kind of leads into the next one. It gives you this it kind of leads towards this incredibly dramatic crescendo, which as a reader, again, I said before, it just absolutely blew me away. So that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to do, and that I'm trying to, when I'm plotting it, that's the kind of structure that I'm working towards.
Right. And you do a lot more with magic in the murder wheel, as well as you have the book that you just mentioned play a role in this book. And again, this is what I really liked about this, was starting with someone like Edmund Ibbs. Ibbs, is that how you pronounce IBB?
That's it. Yes. Yeah. He because obviously the fun thing about writing a series like this is that you, apart from your regulars, so Spector and Flint, etc., you're creating a new cast of characters each time. So I thought I will, with the murder wheel, I thought I'll start from scratch. I'll give us an entirely new perspective for the first part of the book. And like you say, Ibbs is a young solicitor. He has an interest in magic. But he's also got this kind of haplessness, almost like a sort of P.G. Wodehouse type of character who's kind of blundering from one catastrophe to the next. He finds himself on the scene of this bizarre, impossible crime. So I thought that approach struck me as being markedly different from Conjuror. So that's why I thought it would be fun to have a character like Ibbs. And again, when you finish the book, you'll see that his character kind of comes full circle almost. The idea of the murder wheel in the title, I wanted it to, as well as the literal Ferris wheel, which becomes prominent motif in the plot. I wanted this idea of this sort of Chekhov's gun approach of setting out my stall at the beginning and then having everything kind of come back to that in the end. So you'll find that, I think, particularly with the character of Ibs.
I can see your point there, because at the beginning of the book, Edmund he's if I get the terminology, please correct me. He's a solicitor investigating an impossible crime that takes place on a Ferris wheel, in which a man and his wife are on the Ferris wheel. The man is shot, he dies, the wife is charged, and of course the wife says, I have no idea what happened, and he's investigating to instruct the barrister for the trial.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's right. Yes. That's the difference in the British and US legal systems. You would have somebody like Ibs, who's he's kind of a young greenhorn, but really his role is to do all the heavy lifting, and then the criminal barrister would give the performance in court. So I think of somebody like Charles Lawton in Witness for the Prosecution, that kind of boisterous character. He would have the solicitors would be effectively doing the research and putting together the case for him, and he would be the one that would deliver it in court. So Ibs he's very much the kind of he's the man behind the scenes, which comes into play in the plot, because of course he's a fan of magic, and he goes to a magic show where during the show a bizarre, impossible crime occurs, and a murdered corpse appears seemingly from nowhere on the stage during the performance. So it's deliberately a very heightened, bizarre, slightly surreal setup, but I wanted to give it a satisfying payoff. So I thought the more bizarre the setup, the more kind of rigorous I tried to be with the cluing and with the plotting. So I think a character like Ibs, somebody who's behind the scenes but finds himself thrust into the limelight, was quite an interesting perspective for that sort of plot.
Yes, and because he's a magic fan, he sees Joseph Spector in the audience and is wanting to talk to him, but is not able to. And I particularly love, without going into details, the bit of misdirection you have had to be intentional, in which something is about to happen and you think, oh boy, this is not going to end well, and it goes in a different direction. And I actually stopped. I'm actually at the point there is an arrest being made. You'll know what I'm talking about. And I'm like weirdly saying, can you give me 5 minutes? I just want to read these next 2 pages. Just keep talking. Just like he did when he got the magic book at the beginning as well, and he's having to go to work, and he's finding himself caught between a book he really wants to read and a job he really needs to be doing.
That's it. Yes, and of course the fictional magic book in the Murder Wheel is based on a real text, which the book in the Murder Wheel is called The Master of Manipulation, which is obviously just a made-up title, but the real book is called the Expert at the Card Table, and that was a very controversial book in the early decades of the 20th century, because it's a book which gave away so many tricks, card tricks, and sleights of hand that were used by card sharps, but also by illusionists. And like the Master of Manipulation in the Murder Wheel, the author was never identified. It was published anonymously, and the author's identity was never revealed. So that, as you can probably imagine, that was something that fascinated me when I came across the story. So that's why I have my own fictionalized version of that within in the Murder Wheel. So yes, it's a book that somebody like Ibs, who is fascinated by magic, it's a book that someone like him would, of course, be drawn to in the same way that I was drawn to the real book.
Right, and I think it also described Professor Paolini's tricks as well, who was the stage magician at the center of the impossible murder, and of
That's it.
course he is absolutely furious about it too. Now, Hibbs is also is a practicing amateur magician. Is that something that you've ever wanted to do?
Yes, and as you can imagine, I get asked about it a lot, and I'm always having to disappoint people because I have no ability at all. I don't have the leisure demand to pull off a sleight of hand card trick. And no matter how much I practice, I just can't pull off a decent illusion. So to me, I suppose that's why I'm drawn to the theoretical side of things, because I can get my head around that, and I can understand how tricks are supposed to work. And so the closest I get really to performing an illusion is in these books, you know, where I'm focusing entirely on guiding the reader's perception in a particular direction. So so that's the closest I get really to actual magic, you might say.
And I guess, like a good magician, you're telling a story as you're doing your leisure domain as well. So it's a combination.
That's it, exactly. Yes, I think yes, like as I mentioned with Henning Nelms and his book Magic and Showmanship, the idea of a magic show as a narrative, and that each trick doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a chain or a kind of a concatenation of events that is more than the sum of its parts, you know.
I guess I had wondered about this as I was reading this, because obviously some portions of magic involve essentially psychological tricks, as indirection. And I wondered if there was if you found real world applications for this, as maybe not pulling a coin out of the air, obviously, since you can't do that, but anything that you found from the magical techniques that you could say, you know, if this could work over here. Is there any ideas on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I read a lot about scams and confidence tricks as well, which often operate using similar principles as stage magic. It's kind of the dark side of the professional illusionist, you know. And yes, the something that interests me particularly is as well as the psychology, is the neurology of magic. So the way that the way that different parts of the brain are susceptible to types of illusion, you know. I mean, I started off reading people like Oliver Sacks, the great neurologist, who wrote fascinating case studies of unusual or abnormal brain injuries or things like that, and how it affected the individual patient's perception of the world. And there are more kind of niche books and studies of that kind of phenomenon from the perspective of the magician. So you know, to give a basic example, optical illusions and things like that, how to create them, and the parts of the brain which are stimulated, and how they are tricked. So obviously that particular example isn't relevant to murder mystery, but because it's an entirely visual phenomenon. But that kind of direction in my research is something that fascinates me. And in terms of psychological applications, I think the Henning Nelms book, Magic and Showmanship, as well as teaching you how to put on a performance, it teaches you about the how to interact with an audience and how to kind of present yourself in order to sell a trick. For instance, certain stage magicians, I remember an illusionist who went by the name of Cardini, who his speciality was cards, of course. And he is kind of a loose inspiration for Professor Paolini in the Murder Wheel. But Cardini's gimmick was that he was, rather than a conjurer who set out to impress an audience, he was this kind of bumbling, slightly louche figure who to whom mysterious magical things would happen. So he would kind of come on stage and he would be producing cards from thin air and what have you, but he would carry it off in this kind of this sort of kind of rakish, a little bit antiquated Victorian gentleman type of setup, and this idea that the magic itself was not a great wonder, but it was just a kind of everyday inconvenience, and it made the tricks more convincing, and it helped him to sell the performance. It created a character, because he would come on stage and he wouldn't say a word. It would be entirely physical and visual, but he could create a character in that same way. And so in terms of psychology and playing on the psychology of audiences, that's a real masterclass. And I think it all kind of feeds in really to the idea of playing on the psychology of an audience, which is something that the mystery writer, that's the mystery writer's stock in trade. It's about having an insight into what readers will be thinking, and constructing the elaborate double bluffs and triple bluffs and what have you.
Well, I guess this also plays into another one of your interests, which is the theater. As I understand it, you absolutely adore the theater, even though you're not a performer yourself. So what draws you to that?
Well, I'm also, I've talked about the kind of surreal elements in these mysteries and the kind of heightened nature of them, the slightly larger than life, more the bolder colors and things like that. But the world of the theater fascinates me. I'm fascinated by actors and playwrights. But also the actual location of a theater, the atmosphere of it, and the ambience of it, and the fact that you have so many kind of bold personalities under one roof. It just seems to lend itself so perfectly to the world of the murder mystery. And also you have ideas of impersonation and deception and performance, all these kinds of things which dovetail so neatly into the murder mystery. So and there's a very rich tradition of theatrical murder mysteries. People like Naya Marsh, she was very much an impresario of the theatre in New Zealand. She was a real powerhouse figure in bringing Shakespeare and the classics to the stage in New Zealand. But also, she had her long-running Inspector Allen series, many of which are set in and around theatres. So, coming across those books at a young age, and also Agatha Christie, works like Three Act Tragedy, Lord Edgware Dies. So many Golden Age mysteries have that theatrical backdrop. To me, it's just irresistible. It's got an irresistible allure, just as stage magic does.
Yeah. Well, speaking to the life of the theater, I had done some in high school and college, and I doubt I was very good at it, but it gave me the opportunity to see the people, some of whom you look at and go, they're going to go somewhere. They just have that, and that speaks to charisma, which is, I have absolutely no idea. Why do we stare at one person and not another person? Why is one person so drab in real life, and yet when they go on stage, they light it up? And that's always been of interest to me. And the theater itself, the pressure of putting on a play is you have a short-term community all brought together with a similar goal. and the conflicts inherent in them. I've never seen rage expressed so well as one actor towards another who they think is either competitor or not up to the mark.
Yes, you've summed it up perfectly. You've summed up the appeal as well. This idea that you have all of these people working towards a common goal, and it's effectively it's the creation of an illusion, a kind of mass illusion. You as a paying member of the audience, you are going into an auditorium, and you know that you are going to be tricked. You are going to be convinced that these things are happening when they're not. And that is that kind of experience is, I suppose, it's endemic to writing fiction and to performing and to the kind of human experience, I suppose. But also the London theatre in particular is something that I have done a lot of reading and a lot of research into, and the ghost stories, the superstitions, the folklore that surrounds it, all of these things are just absolutely fascinating and incredible to me. And I tried to kind of distill my enthusiasm and fascination for all of that into the writing, and to kind of if you like, kind of put it all into a sort of cocktail shaker and mix it together, and these books are the result of that.
Right. I understand now you've written some short stories about Mr. Spector as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Have you ever thought about putting that as a collection?
Yes, I'm very much hoping that will be on the cards, because I started out writing the short stories, and I'm still writing them. I'm going to be giving away an exclusive short story with pre-orders of book 3. So I'm still very much in that kind of short fiction frame of mind. It's its own type of challenge. It's a very different beast to a fleshed out novel with a full cast of characters, but at the same time the principles are the same. I liken it to, if a novel is a full scale magic show on stage with large scale illusions, then a short story is more like a kind of a game of 3-card Monty. In the skill is the same, it's just the trappings that are different. So I wrote a number of short stories with Spector before I tackled a full-length novel, and many of the mysteries were impossible crimes, which were in some fashion or other inspired or adapted from a real life illusion. So, for instance, there was a story called The Indian Rope Trick, which is a favorite of mine, where the premise was that there was a bet between 2 rival magicians about who can perform the best version of this famously impossible trick. So that was the premise behind it, and then so it was using the imagery of the Indian rope trick that helped me to devise the impossible crime element and the whodunit plot structure.
Mm-hmm. Well, in addition to Death and the Conjuror and Murder Wheel, there is going to be a third Joseph Spector coming out. Can you tell us anything about that?
Absolutely, yes. It's going to be called Cabaret Macabre. So it's a slightly more gothic entry in the series. It's more of a country house mystery. It's also a little bit of an experiment on my part, in that it's a retelling or a reimagining of the Jacobean drama, the Revenger's Tragedy, which has always fascinated me. Gold writers like Agatha Christie would use Shakespeare, they would use John Webster and the like for their titles and for their epigraphs and things. I thought I'll try and do something similar and adapt the very bloodthirsty plot of a Jacobean drama and kind of turn it inside out and reimagine it and plant it in a 1930s whodunit setup. So it's different, but it's the same. It's got a string of impossible crimes. It's got Spector roped into investigating out at this isolated country house where this strange family is being picked off one by one by a seemingly phantom killer. So there's the premise behind it. Like I say, it's called Cabaret Macabre. So it's I'm deliberately kind of again playing up that Edgar Allan Poe Grand Guignol side of the whodunit. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's published in the US by Mysterious Press in July. And it's available to pre-order now. And like I say, pre-orders will also receive an exclusive short story that I've written to promote the book. So yes, do check it out and do pre-order now.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier, I think 6 months ago, about working on a locked room YA series with someone else. Was there any progress on that?
Well, yes, nothing that I can talk about in any depth at the moment, but yes, the simple answer is yes. That's an entirely different project to the Spector series, but at the same time playing on my love of the locked room mystery and the impossible crime. So yes, and it's geared towards younger readers because I mean, obviously it's the sort of book that I wish I'd been able to read when I was that age, you know. So it's my attempt to kind of share my enthusiasm and my love of the genre with readers who might not be familiar with the classics, you know, who may not have grown up reading Agatha Christie. Mm-hmm. So that's the idea.
So if anyone wants to learn more about you and your books, where can they find you online?
I'm on pretty much all the social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. I recently set up my author account on BookBub, which is a great website. I'm absolutely loving it. I'm firing out book reviews on BookBub as well. So you can give me a follow on all of those. My my handle is the same across all of them. It's at Tom Mead Author.
Mm-hmm. And your website as well.
Yes, my website is just tommeadauthor.com.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much. We've been at it for an hour, and I thank the audience for tuning in and staying for the show. Deb, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Just briefly.
Okay. Well, we'll turn it over to Deb, and then we'll say goodbye. Okay.
All right. See, they're bossing me around already, but that's okay.
I am the talent.
He is the talent, and I am nobody. But it's okay. I want to thank all of you for coming for our live VOD event today. From England, no less. I mean, how much greater could that be? And since Bill's going to tie it up, I won't say his favorite closing line, which is now my favorite closing line for the vodcast. But thank you so much again. I really appreciate your participation. Bill?
Okay. Tom.
Thank you, Deb.
Okay. And Tom, thank you very, very much for talking with us today. I really appreciated getting to meet you and your books. And this is
you, Bill.
Absolutely. And this is Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents A Conversation with Tom Mead. And I hope your favorite book is the one you're reading now. Thank you very much. The Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents podcast is sponsored by the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. The store is open with limited hours, plus we accept appointments and offer a drive-by service. The store will also ship books to your home, including those from the Peschel Press Mystery line, including our annotated editions of novels by Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers. To learn more, visit the store at www.mysterybooksonline.com. And thank you for listening.